Good morning. My name is David Tonin, and this is my story. I grew up here in Dartmouth in a pretty stable, for the most part, middle-class home. And part of that stability came from the fact that my family was Catholic, and one of the components to our week regularly as I was growing up was that we would go to church every Sunday. And so as a result of that, I grew up with a really healthy respect for God, for the church, and for priests. But for me, really, I went because I had to go. I didn't go necessarily because I wanted to go. And for me, it was just a very religious sort of experience, something that I did every Sunday with my family. But it didn't really have a personal connect with me, between me and God, or me and Jesus. Though I knew who he was, I knew what he'd done, but it didn't really resonate with my soul and my spirit and my mind. When I became a teenager, I had a group of friends that I hung around with from both, some of these people were with me in the Air Cadet program I was with, and some were my buddies at high school. And, for the most part, they were, by most worldly standards, they were a pretty good group of guys, But one of the core activities that started to evolve the older I got into my teenage years was that Saturday night was reserved for partying. And the whole scene really was all built around and centered around alcohol, sometimes way too much alcohol. And when I became a university student, I moved out of the house. I was completely on my own, and I had a part-time job, and my life became about living for Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night, which were party nights. And then, of course, Sunday was all about not going to church anymore. It was all about trying to recover from the 3 previous nights. For me, I really put church and I put God completely on the back burner. It was now a thing of the past for me. You see, I was really, really selfish at this point in my life. I put myself first in everything. It was all about me. I did what I wanted, and I was just trying to figure out where I fit in the world and what I was really supposed to be doing and what was I here for. And as university continued for the next 2 years, my first 2 years of university, that was my life. Going to school, working a little bit, and partying. And partying sounds like I was having a lot of fun, and in some ways I thought I was. But the more that dragged on, the emptier and emptier it began to feel. And one of the things you need to know is that at that point in my life, I was a really, really shy guy. I know that's hard for some of you to believe, but it's true. You see, I had really, really low self-esteem. I didn't have a very good sense of self-worth or self-confidence. And I really didn't like myself a whole lot, and I didn't think other people would really like who I really was. And so I used the alcohol to kind of suppress that and to kind of mask who I really was and how I was created to be. And like I said, as that routine cycled through for those first 2 years of university, I started to feel, even though I was at parties with a lot of friends, I started to feel really lonely, and I started to feel really, really empty. But I guess at some point, towards the end of that second year of university, some common sense either started to kick in, or God started knocking on the door of my life, because I started to regularly start assessing what was going on in my life, and I started asking the question, isn't there more to life than this? And it was about that time that a new friend of mine, well, a girlfriend actually, invited me to the church that she was going to. She attended this church that had what they called a college and career group. So it was a group of 20-ish guys and gals that would get together on Saturday nights, and they'd do something social and have a really good time, and then they'd spend maybe, half an hour to 45 minutes gathered around in a circle towards the end, reading a Bible passage or passages, and then talking about how that was relevant to their lives, or how God was just relevant to life, period. Well, I stood back and looked at this group of people and thought, wow, here's a group of guys and gals that are just like me. They're the same age as me, and yet they're having a really good time doing social stuff, and the alcohol equation is completely removed. And this whole investigating Jesus thing really quite intrigued me. And you know, for me, I was just really instantly captivated. You know, and as I started to discover more and more about who Jesus really was, even though I'd gone to church and I kind of knew at a macro level, once it started to become really personal and a lot more detailed, and I got to actually study it and discover it and explore it for myself, the whole thing really started to come alive. Well, about a year into this, they had this thing where they called it a retreat weekend. So there was a bunch of college and career groups from various churches from around Atlantic Canada that got together for that weekend. And they had a special speaker come down. And he was a pastor from New Brunswick, a young guy. And he gave a series of messages over the weekend. And I don't remember a whole lot about the weekend itself except the last closing session that he gave. And during that session, he built a little bit of a message and a teaching around a story that Jesus shared in the Bible about the prodigal son. And if you don't know that story exactly, I'd encourage you to look it up. It's in Luke chapter 15. But the essence of it was that the prodigal son, after totally going through a state of rebellion, leaving his home and his family, he went and he returned back to his father as a guy who was broken and desolate and poor, because he'd basically taken his inheritance, spent it all on partying. And I thought, I can relate to that guy. I didn't spend my inheritance necessarily, but I spent a lot of ridiculous money on partying. And that's what this guy had done. But he had finally come to a place where he humbled himself and decided to return to his father to ask for forgiveness and ask if maybe he could just be a servant in his father's household so he could eat again. Well, the father, though he didn't have to in the story, he welcomed the son back with exuberance and with love and with compassion, and he embraced him, and he threw a party to celebrate that he was back home, and he restored him to the place of being his son. Well, that night, it was like God was speaking through this pastor directly to me. I didn't even notice the 100-ish people that were around me in the room. It was like he was speaking directly to me, and they were all gone. And I felt like God was saying, you're like that kid. And I would like you to come back to me. I would like to embrace you. I would like to take away that emptiness that you feel. I would like to give you a sense of purpose and peace and joy. I have a plan for you. And I stood back and I was just in awe, and even on the inside trembling a little bit. Trembling a little bit with fear, but also trembling with a great deal of anticipation and excitement. So that night, I prayed a really quiet prayer. Nobody knew about it. I just prayed, God, if you really like that father in the story, please embrace me. I want to accept what Jesus has done for me by the sacrifice he made on the cross. Please come and change my life, and please hug me.